This recording is one of a series intended to support you when writing your assessments for the Associate Diploma in People Management. This recording focuses on 5 HR01 Employment Relationship Management. Assessments are revised on a regular basis, and this guidance is based on the June 2024 version. The last moderation window for this assessment is September 2026. This assessment contains 10 questions that assess 10 assessment criteria, also referred to as ACs. The overall word count for the assessment for this unit is 3,900 plus or minus 10%. To ensure full coverage of all ACs, this means approximately 390 words can be allocated to the answer for each AC. The extra 10% allows up to around 429 words per AC. This assessment is based on a scenario. When answering the assessment questions, you should answer each question within the context of the scenario provided. The scenario tells you that you work for a public sector organisation. The public sector organisation has recently undergone a merger with another similar public sector organisation that has had significant staff changes across key departments. The incoming leadership and management and people practice teams are relatively new to their posts and have limited awareness of managing employee relations in the public sector, as many have been recruited from the private sector. There are concerns that this could affect commitment to existing employee relations practices. With this in mind, your People Practice Director has asked you to write a briefing paper. You need to provide the teams with knowledge and understanding about, firstly, the various forms of representation that can be employed at work and how these are used to support workplace harmony. And second, the different forms of conflict and dispute resolution and how to manage performance, disciplinary and grievance matters lawfully. The 10 questions in the assessment brief allow you to address these points. Question 1 asks you to differentiate between employee involvement and employee participation and how involvement and participation builds relationships. You could explain the term employee involvement and then explain how employee involvement builds relationships. You could then take the same approach with employee participation. The question asks you to differentiate between the two approaches, so you need to draw on some differences. You could use words such as unlike or in contrast to signpost the differences. Question 2 asks you to compare union and non-union employee representation. It is important to compare, in other words, show knowledge of the similarities and differences between union and non-union representation. You could, for example, consider differences in the power that union and non-union representatives have. This question asks you to evaluate. So you need to judge and appraise whether employee voice leads to better organisational performance. To do this, you should show knowledge of the views that suggest that voice does lead to better performance and consider the views that question whether voice leads to better organisational performance. It is important to draw on reliable evidence when answering this question. Question 4 asks you to explain the concept of better working lives and how this can be designed. This question has 2 parts and both need to be addressed to pass. You could start by explaining what is meant by better working lives and then explain how better working lives can be designed. There are many CIPD resources that can be drawn on to inform your answer. Question 5 asks you to distinguish between organisational conflict and misbehaviour. Before you can distinguish between conflict and misbehaviour, It is important to have clear understanding of each term. It is not enough to explain what each term means. You need to show that you understand how they differ. Question 6 requires you to assess emerging trends in the types of conflict and industrial sanctions. You therefore need to evaluate and appraise the trends. It is important to include data and evidence to support points. For example, if you choose to write about strikes, you could consider whether the number of stoppages is increasing or decreasing, and explore the reasons for the trends as part of your assessment. You could also consider that strikes have other measures too, through number of working days lost and number of workers involved. You could also show evidence of trends relating to individual conflict that could be evidenced through employment tribunal claims or claims to similar courts. Question 7 asks you to distinguish between third-party conciliation, mediation, and arbitration. It is important to distinguish in this answer. It is not enough to explain each term. You could start by explaining what conciliation is, then explain what mediation is, and explain how it differs to conciliation. Lastly, you could explain what arbitration is and explain how arbitration differs to conciliation and mediation. Question 8 asks you to explain the principles of legislation relating to unfair dismissal in respect of capability and conduct issues. This question focuses on capability and conduct, so there is no need to write about other fair reasons for dismissal, as this will use words without gaining marks. It is essential to refer to relevant legislation to show where the principles originate. There is also scope to include cases in this answer to support your points. You will only be able to set out the key principles due to the word count available, rather than write about everything that you know that relates to capability and misconduct. Question 9 asks you to analyse key causes of employee grievances. When analysing, you need to break the topic down into separate parts and examine each part with thoughts and judgments. You need to show how main ideas are related and why they are important. Here, you could break the topic down by showing knowledge of the key causes. There is scope to include causes of individual grievances and collective grievances. Finally, question 10 asks you to advise on the importance of handling grievances effectively. It is important to focus on the question asked. The question does not ask how grievances should be handled and what process should be followed. Instead, you should provide advice on why it is important that grievances are handled effectively. You could advise on positive impacts of handling grievances effectively and damaging effects if grievances are not handled effectively. Before we close, I would like to emphasise the need to apply wider reading to inform each answer and include citations to reliable sources to show evidence of this reading. The sources cited should be presented in a bibliography, and referencing should be carried out using a recognised form of referencing. Your centre will be able to advise you on the form you should use. We have now reached the end of the webinar for 5HR01. Other webinars are available for other units of the Associate Diploma in People Management. Thank you for listening.